Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're doing a deep dive on something I know a lot of you think about, greenwashing. We're going past those splashy headlines, you know the ones, and looking deeper at how these companies, the ones making environmental promises, actually work. See, when we talk about greenwashing, we're talking about that difference, that gap between what a company says they're going to do to help the planet and what actually ends up happening. Sometimes it's like super obvious, sometimes it's more subtle, but often there's this disconnect. They're putting on this eco-friendly show, but what's the reality? And let's be honest, most of the time we think, oh, they're totally doing this on purpose. It's all about the bottom line, right? But what if I told you there's a whole other side to this? It's not always about some evil corporate plan. It's about, get this, organizational structure. Yeah, you heard me right. We're about to explore something called loose coupling. And trust me, it might totally change how you see those big corporate environmental pledges. Imagine a car, okay, with the steering wheel. It's kind of loose, not totally broken, but there's some play in it. Makes it a lot harder to steer well, right? That's kind of what loose coupling is like inside these companies. You get different departments, teams, even just individuals all working together, but with like different levels of connection, how much they depend on each other. You know, sometimes those connections, they got to be tight. Like the finance team, legal team, those two have to be on the same page for things to run smoothly. But then you got these other departments, they do their own thing, more independent. That's where things get really interesting, especially when a company's trying to go green. And get this, that's exactly what today's source material is all about. How this loose coupling right inside a company could actually be a much bigger reason for greenwashing than we realize.
And what's so interesting is that loose coupling, well, it's often not something a company plans. It just kind of happens naturally as they grow. They become this huge, complicated thing with all these specialized departments, right? And that specialization, while it makes them efficient, it also creates these gaps in communication. So a company, they can genuinely want to become more sustainable, have the best intentions, but how they're structured, it makes it so hard to actually turn those good vibes into company-wide action.
So it's not always some big calculated scheme. It could just be like miscommunication departments stuck in their own little bubbles. That leads to these greenwashing accusations.
Absolutely. And our research, it points to 3 specific ways this loose coupling pops up, especially when we're talking environmental action.
Okay, now I'm really interested. Give it to me straight. What's the first one?
It's called causal indeterminacy.
Causal indeterminacy. Okay, that sounds a little intimidating, maybe even made up. In plain English, what does that even mean?
Basically, it means trying to figure out how a company's actions directly affect something as huge and complex as the environment. Well, it's really, really hard. It's like trying to hit a moving target in the dark.
No wonder companies struggle with this. Yeah. I can barely hit a target that's not even moving in broad daylight.
Exactly. It's not always clear which actions are actually going to be effective. Especially with these massive global problems, you know. Take something like protecting endangered species, biodiversity loss. A company might want to help, might even say they are, but figuring out what specific actions will actually make a difference on a global scale, that is incredibly tough.
It's like trying to bake a cake, but you're not exactly sure which ingredients are the ones making it rise. You could end up with a delicious cake, a total disaster, or anything in between. And it's super hard to prove you used the right ingredients, even if you followed the recipe as best you could. So with this causal indeterminacy, it's the uncertainty that's the issue, not always bad intentions.
Wow, that is fascinating. Okay, what's the next thing, the next source of loose coupling that we need to unpack here?
This one's called the fragmented external environment.
Okay, fragmented external environment.
Okay, fragmented external environment.
I'm already intrigued. How does that make things even more difficult for these companies who are trying to be, environmentally responsible? Okay, so imagine you're trying to get through a maze, right? But the walls keep moving. That's kind of what it's like for these companies trying to be eco-friendly, actually environmentally responsible. The rules are always changing, different groups are demanding different things, and customers, they have their own expectations. It's a lot.
Oh, tell me about it. It's like everybody wants something different, and these companies are stuck in the middle, just trying to keep everyone happy.
Exactly. And in that kind of crazy environment, it's so hard for a company to come up with a plan, an environmental strategy that actually makes sense and gets the job done. They're always putting out fires, reacting to the latest thing, instead of focusing on long-term solutions.
That makes a lot of sense. Do you have an example, something specific, where we saw this fragmented external environment in action?
Oh, absolutely. Think about that whole CFC crisis a while back. Companies, they were dealing with these brand new scientific discoveries, right? About the ozone layer and how it was being damaged. And then the regulations started changing, and there was all this pressure from the public and governments to find alternatives and fast.
CFCs, those are the chemicals used in like aerosol cans and refrigerators, right?
That's right. And while some companies, they might have truly wanted to fix this ozone problem, there was so much pressure, so much uncertainty back then that it made it incredibly hard to make, smart strategic decisions.
So they were dealing with a moving target and this fragmented external environment, like you said.
Yeah.
Sounds like a recipe for disaster, even if they were trying to do the right thing.
Exactly. And it's those messy, reactive responses. That's what often gets labeled as greenwashing, even if it wasn't a deliberate, malicious act.
Wow, this is really making me think differently about those corporate environmental promises. You know what I mean? Okay, so we've got causal indeterminacy, where it's hard to even know what's going to work, and then a fragmented external environment that forces these companies to react quickly. What's the third source of this loose coupling that can lead to greenwashing?
This one you might find really relatable, especially if you've ever worked for a big company. We call it the fragmented internal environment.
Ooh. Yeah, I think I can guess where this is going. Sounds like internal politics, departments not talking to each other, different priorities. That can get really messy.
You got it. And that lack of alignment, just everyone on the same page inside the company, well, it can totally sabotage a company's efforts to become more sustainable. I mean, truly sustainable.
So it's like the marketing team, they're out there shouting about how green the company is, but meanwhile, behind the scenes, the operations team, they're using these old polluting processes.
Exactly. Or you have a company saying, oh, we're all about ethical sourcing now. But then when you look closer, each department has a totally different idea of what ethical even means. It's wild.
That's crazy. It's like different parts of the same company are speaking different languages, even though they're supposed to be working towards, the same big goal, ideally at least.
Yes. And that's where this loose coupling, it becomes a huge problem. It creates this disconnect, right, between what the company is saying they're doing for the environment and what's actually happening, on the ground in different departments, across different teams.
It's like, I don't know, the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing, but with a company, a huge company,
It's true.
Yeah.
And I bet a lot of people listening, they've seen this themselves at work. That feeling of being stuck, like you're in your own little silo and what your team cares about, it's totally different from what other teams are doing. Happens all the time, and it's no surprise it affects how companies try to be environmentally friendly too.
This is seriously eye-opening. So knowing all this about loose coupling, how it works, why it matters, should we just assume companies aren't being honest? Like, are we supposed to just give up and be cynical?
Not necessarily. No, not at all. But it does tell us something. We need a healthy dose of skepticism. We can't just take a company at their word. We've got to dig a little deeper.
Less trusting those fancy ad campaigns, more like doing our own research, right?
Exactly. We got to look beyond the headlines, the slogans, all that carefully crafted PR stuff. Think about what we know about a company, like how it's structured, the industry it's in, the pressures they face, all of that. Are there any red flags? Do their actions actually match their big talk?
So it's about asking those tougher questions.
Yeah.
And looking for those mismatches where different parts of the company aren't lining up.
Yes. And it's not about trying to catch companies or anything,
Yeah.
It's about understanding how complicated things are for them and pushing them, encouraging them to be more transparent, more accountable. Because at the end of the day, that's how we actually get stuff done, right?
Totally agree. It's not about blaming anyone. It's about making things better. And this loose coupling thing, it gives us a whole new way to think about that.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
This deep dive has been so insightful. Seriously, I feel like I've learned a ton.
Me too. It's always fun to unpack these topics that aren't so black and white.
Now, before we go, here's something to think about, okay? If companies are kind of like, living things, always growing, always adapting, can they actually get past this whole loose coupling thing? Can they learn to actually walk the walk when it comes to the environment? Or is greenwashing, whether they mean to do it or not, just an unavoidable part of doing business in today's world? It's a question worth asking ourselves. So, until next time, keep asking those important questions and keep on diving deeper.